Hello, my name is Michael O'Brien, and let me start by thanking John and the team at Carne for inviting me to be involved in this perspective series. I will start also by saying that I've spent all of my working life outside of Ireland, and in fact probably most of my life outside of Ireland. I was born in Cork. I have three brothers. My mum was a teacher, my dad was in the bank, and from an early age, one of my lasting memories was the importance that education played, and the emphasis my mum and dad placed on education and curiosity and solving problems as a means which they would see as unlocking the future. So we saw that come into play when we moved from Kerry to Clare, because my dad moved bank office, and we were moved from being booked into a boarding school into St. Flannan's College in Ennis because of its academic excellence. It was at St. Flannan's I began to realize the importance of what you're good at versus what you actually enjoy. And for me, at an early age, maths and physics were kind of the direction that I felt that I had a natural affinity and interest and curiosity around. So come the Leaving Cert, I went to University of Limerick, NIHE at the time, to study applied mathematics, which I again loved the idea of solving problems using mathematics. Come 1985, I then embarked on a career as an actuary, which I didn't even know existed until I had 6 months with the Ulster Investment Bank in Dublin, where I worked with an actuary and began to realize this seemed to be a pretty good career for someone like me who literally wanted to make decent money and have a career that was focused primarily on using mathematics to solve problems. So I joined Towers Perrin in the UK, and for me, what I didn't realize at the time was the difference between US firms and European firms was that the traditional UK actuarial firm would really focus on just technical skills and honing those technical skills as actuaries for the consulting businesses, whereas the US firms would, yes, focus on having a strong technical core with their employees, but also broaden the skill sets around things like presentation skills, negotiation skills, sales skills, and also everybody was given a mentor to help them navigate that early stages of one's career. The hardest thing for me was it was so good I probably overstayed my time, because by my late 30s I began to have serious doubts that being an actuary was the right career for me. So by then I'd realized that investments and markets were really what I had a deep interest in. So in 1999, I switched from Towers Perrin to a small boutique called Barclays Global Investors. Now, for those who don't know Barclays Global Investors, it became the largest asset management firm in the world. But back in 1999-2000, it was really a firm run by a lot of quantitative scientists that had a deep interest in using mathematical models to manage money. We were pioneering the growth of indexation, which is now a dominant way of managing money worldwide. We basically started and built the iShares brand, which is the largest ETF provider in the world. And we also pioneered a lot of the risk models and investment performance models that are now used kind of mainstay in today's quantitative investing in the industry. But looking back at what made BGI successful, and to me it is, and which is a characteristic of successful firms in any industry, was the deep need to have everything proved by fact. So everything was fact-based. It had to be empirically valid and theoretically sound. Data was a critical element, and the use of technology. So data and technology were a very clear set of principles, an environment that fostered innovation at every level, so you're never too junior to have a good idea. And in science, that stands still the test of time today. And so the firm basically grew from a very small niche boutique in 2000 to a firm managing over 1.5 trillion by 2009. Financial crisis hit. I think it changed the world for many of us. For us at BGI, it was the end of an era. Barclays decided to sell the firm to Blackrock. And I moved across to Blackrock, where I saw the importance of culture play out, and bringing the culture of BGI into the culture of Blackrock was probably the biggest challenge the merger faced. At that time, I was approached by JP Morgan to run the global institutional business, And I guess for me, the big learning point there was the self-confidence to back yourself to do things that you probably don't have the experience in, but you've got the intelligence and the application to get to that point. And I had never covered the US, but Mary Erdos at JP Morgan had the confidence that I would learn. And after a year and a half, it was second nature to me, that I was very comfortable across any jurisdiction, running teams with different cultures, different kinds of clients, different requirements. But it shows that if you back yourself and you have the confidence, then the fortitude and resilience of the individual with the right training and support can effectively achieve almost anything. At JP Morgan, it was, for me, the firm was focused on clients first. It was a firm that was genuinely global. The leadership was the one aspect of JP Morgan I would call out. And Jamie Dimon, who's probably been one of the longest lasting CEOs on Wall Street, for me was and is probably the best leader I've seen within an organization I've worked with. And I've worked with lots and lots of great leaders. The firm itself is genuinely global. It's a very heavy reliance on technology. The brand and what it communicates is one that's protected carefully, but it's all underpinned by extremely strong culture. Something which I also put alongside leadership, for me, has been defining features of very strong and successful businesses. 10 years at JP Morgan, I started with the global institutional business where I led that globally. I then became CEO of the European business, which at that time, the firm was going through a lot of externalities and reputational challenges. Interrelations with the regulators were challenged. So the role of CEO was one of being that intermediary between the firm and the external markets, not least the regulators. My final role at JP Morgan was to run the multi-asset solutions business worldwide. And for me, that kind of brought all the strands together where, you have the technical knowledge of markets, you have the deep understanding of your clients, which are predominantly pension funds, insurance companies, and, bringing together all of the competencies within JP Morgan to foster and build portfolios that solved real life problems for these large institutions. In May this year, I left JP Morgan, moved back to the UK, and at this point have a blank canvas as to where the future lies, but with a very clear set of learnings with a number of fantastic employers that I've had the benefit of working with over the past 25 years. So what do I care about? The one advantage of having a blank canvas ahead of you, now that I've left JP Morgan in May this year, is I get a chance to sit back and think about doing the things that I actually care about. And for me, amongst many that I've got on the list, the ones that come to the top of my list would be financial literacy and education. If we look at a lot of the drivers of the challenges in retirement around the world, a lot of the issues with social financial poverty, it comes back to financial literacy. And it always shocks me that we don't teach our kids the key elements of financial management as part of the curriculum at school. So I've been involved and got involved with a company in the UK called Red Start. It literally fosters through the school network in a limited number of places, and we'd hope to get that sort of wider over the coming years, but teaching very young kids and teenagers the basic elements of financial management, understanding mortgages, understanding the power of compound interest, understanding retirement, understanding insurance, and through a mixture of online games, which at the moment is the predominant way of engaging with them. But prior to COVID, a lot of interactive games helping kids fully understand the need to understand themselves, how you save, why you save, and the various means by which you can save. Second on my list is a combination of two things, and I've learned this from having worked with a number of the largest organizations in the world, looking at what actually in my view, defines the successful ones from the less successful. It comes down to a combination of culture and leadership. And for me, the failures of the financial sector in the global financial crisis came down to a failure of culture, a failure of literally understanding what the role of banks are, the responsibilities that we had to the markets, the regulators, the public. The fact that cultures are not self-sustaining, you've got to refresh them. You've got to continue to remind people what are the principles of your business, what is your true North Star, and ultimately what the culture of the firm is. And if you look at the turnover in financial services, for example, it can be up to 10% a year. It doesn't take that long before the majority of your employees are very much recent joiners. So if you don't create an awareness and a proactive attitude around defining your culture, challenging your culture, and making sure those new arrivals and long stayers understand the culture, what happens is people start to define their own culture. They define their own best behaviors. They define their own standards of what's acceptable and what's not. And that, to me, was one of the primary drivers of some of the challenges that we faced during the financial crisis with some of the behaviors of some of the banks. Underpinning all of this is leadership. I've been very fortunate to have worked with some of the very best leaders in financial markets, and distilling down to what is that makes a strong leader. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you're a great manager, you're a great leader. I mean, the way I define management and leadership is management is something which you're given top down. It's a promotion, it's an appointment, it's a role. Leadership is given to you bottom up. And in order to win hearts and minds and get the respect of your workforce, I attended a session which was led by Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan a few years ago, and I recall he laid out what the attributes of excellent leadership are, and I've put them to mind, and I've never forgotten them, which were clearly, alongside things like technical competency and presentation skills and so on, you've got to have you've got to have a high degree of ethics. You've got to have integrity, humanity. You've got to care about your people, and that comes into diversity and just the nature of the employees and the population, and how they interact and respect they have for each other. You've got to have humility, and you've got to have gratitude. And I think how many of our leaders today you could put against those criteria and say they measure up well. And in fact, if ever we have a polarization in the success or failure of dealing with COVID worldwide right now, you can pretty much map that back to the effectiveness and the strength of leadership that countries have had around the world. COVID and me. I've seen written in many articles the point that the coronavirus is like one big storm in which people find themselves in different boats, and I think that's somewhat of a simplification insofar as the range of boats go from cruise liners and luxury right through to rowboats. Personally, the coronavirus lockdown coincided with me returning from New York, where I was leaving JP Morgan. I had a clear slate with regard to my commitments. The kids were being sent home from boarding school. I hadn't seen them really while they were boarding school for on and off for 2 years. So it gave me 5 months with good weather to reconnect, re-engage with my teenagers, spend time with my wife, spend time at home. So for me, it was a fortuitous coincidence that the lockdown and my return from New York were side by side. I will say that as I look to the broader implications that still impact me of coronavirus, the ones that come to mind are the things that we've taken for granted, which are no longer achievable, feasible, such as simple things like visiting your parents. My parents live on the west coast of Ireland. My wife's dad lives on the east coast of Ireland. Whereas in the past we could just hop on a flight and go see them, now with lockdown and restricted movements and cancelled flights, it's been next to near impossible to even do the simplest things by visiting your parents. I look beyond that. I look at my teenage kids and the impact on them. from an education point of view. What I see is huge disruption. My kids have just done their A-levels and are going on to university, so I've seen the transition to the end of their time at secondary school or high school, which was a disaster. They went from just sort of fully engaged hand-to-hand education to online learning. Then the A-level results were cancelled, and we had the issues about the grading and the uncertainty and the trauma and the anguish that caused, right through to their first couple of weeks in university, which we've seen has had a very tough impact on a number of kids who subsequently get locked down. So I think, if we look at how coronavirus has impacted me, from the positive opportunity and coincidence to spend time with my family over the summer, to where we are today, being unable to easily see one's parents, the ability to travel and use time to visit other places, the impact on the younger generations of our population, and not just the school kids. And to the extent that people assume that online learning works, I think anything like education, any form of professional growth, the dynamic environment one needs to engender a sense of professional growth amongst young people, online learning, remote learning is not even a good second best. You then look at the impact on jobs, which has fallen disproportionately on the younger population, and there's no doubt that the coronavirus, has had an impact on me insofar as I see this. I look at my colleagues and then their kids who have just started jobs and the impact it's had on them. Like I said, I look at the society and around us and how society has had a huge polarization on how people have been impacted. I think the assumption that technology solves the problem, that working remotely is suitable for everyone, there is no doubt that it does afford parents with young children the flexibility to be at home and support each other. But the idea of young professionals starting their job maybe in an apartment or a house with about 4 or 5 of them, living off a constrained broadband, working off their beds, not being able to interact with their colleagues at work, it's clear to me that is not a sustainable situation, no matter how good the Zooms or the online technology is. So I do worry that it will take longer than is comfortable to get to a vaccine. I do worry certain industries around us, the things we take for granted, like the high street, things we take for granted, like cinemas, restaurants, will all suffer irreparable damage. I think that people's savings and retirements, as the central banks keep the interest rates down, that will impact people's ability to maintain any form of standard of living in retirement. And most importantly, it's clear to me that where we're going and how we land and what the new normal looks like will really be very much an unknown. And with that, I think will come a higher degree of stress on individuals. We'll see a higher degree of mental challenges, mental illnesses, and I think the support network that society is providing is very patchy, is very uneven, and I do worry that there will be more losers than winners in the smaller community around where I live than we would expect. As I look to the future, where for me everything has changed. If you think about it, I have, after 10 years, just left JP Morgan, where there was a corporate structure around my professional life, objectives, teams, a set of goals. My kids have just left for university, so I guess that would qualify us as empty nesters. COVID has arrived and has completely taken away a lot of the things I've taken for granted that I would do if ever I had the free time, such as spend more time with my family in Ireland, travel the world and enjoy myself, spend time with friends and family, go out and eat and drink and enjoy some culture in London, the shows. All of that has changed. So I stand back and I say, well, what do I do in this environment? Well, the first thing is, the blank canvas is my choice. Now, some people may call what I've transitioned into retirement. I would agree with calling me somebody in retirement if retirement is defined as a state of mind where you own your own priorities. It doesn't mean you stop working. It just means that you get to set your priorities in life. And for me, those priorities would feature on a number of key goals. One is I still want to get involved and be more involved with financial literacy for young people. As I said, I do think the problem we have in this country around financial poverty, social financial poverty, ill-prepared retirees comes from the fact that we don't actually teach our kids about finance. So Red Start will be clearly something which I will be looking to get more engaged with here in the UK and looking to broaden its platform throughout the country. The second one is I would look to actually start to help and use my experience supporting young startups in certain areas. So climate is something which I think everybody would agree with, is something which has come to a tipping point. And a lot of what I've been doing over the last 10 years in JP Morgan and the broader professional community has been around environmental, social and governance. And in particular, one area that I am getting very involved with is the area of climate, and just looking at how do we actually get companies today to reduce their carbon footprint, to be more thoughtful about how much water they're using and wasting, and how much landfill, non-recyclable waste they're creating. So there are a number of young companies, startups, that have got some very innovative ways to actually work with companies to do things better in that space. Also in the area of impact investing, where green bonds and raising finance such that capital is being used in a way that is thoughtful around our planet, our social fairness, and good transparency around governance. The other area will be working with my industry. As asset management goes worldwide, it's a $100 trillion industry, employs tens or hundreds of thousands of people. But it's been an industry that's been very product oriented. It designs and it builds what it wants to sell. But I think the industry needs to migrate towards better value for money, but more importantly, building products and building solutions and outcomes that actually solve individuals and institutions' requirements. So instead of looking to outperform an index, which is what most of the industry tries to do, ultimately, if you look at what people need, the individual people who are retired, they need income, particularly in an environment of low and negative interest rates. Institutions need total return. They may need some control around variables like surplus levels and pension funds, but ultimately we need to find a way to get the industry speaking the language of clients, to be much more client-centric and a lot less product-centric. Within those confines, there's a amount of mentoring that I've been involved with. I think when you've spent 30 years, 35 years in industry, you tend to learn things that you'd like your next generation not to have to find out the hard way. So I have and do mentor a number of young professionals that I've maintained, retained communication and contact with from my previous careers at both Blackrock and JP Morgan. Finally, I'd like to wrap up and again thank John Donoghue and the team at Carne for affording me this opportunity to share my perspectives. We are in many ways at a tipping point in terms of climate. I think society is being challenged around social fairness, which has been brought to a head through coronavirus. Personally, for the first time in 35 years, I've now got a blank canvas to set my own priorities. And personally, I'd look to try and align what I want to do with things that will actually reflect well on making things better, both from an industry point of view, climate point of view, and from friends and family.